They threw me out into the rain with $300 and the belief that I was worthless. My mother called my dream an embarrassment. My father called my defiance a mistake. They never imagined that the girl they discarded would one day return to buy the whole damn town. My name is Amelia Davis. I am 29 years old, and from the window of my private jet, the Arizona desert below looks like a crumpled golden map of a life I left behind. 11 years. It's been 11 years since the night that both ended my world and allowed it to truly begin. People see the success, the multi-million-dollar company, the confident woman on magazine covers. They don't see the ghost that still lingers, the memory of a girl who sometimes shivers in a phantom rain. To understand who I am now, you have to travel back with me. Back to the suffocating heat of a Scottsdale summer night. Back to when I was 18. Back to the night my mother tried to sell me. It began, as most of my family's tragedies did, in our pristine dining room, a room more for show than for living. The air was thick enough to cut with a knife, a suffocating blend of my mother's expensive cloying perfume, Chanel No. 5, her signature scent of social warfare, and the heavy aroma of her Sunday best pot roast. I sat stiffly, the cream-colored silk dress she had forced me into feeling like a stranger's skin. It was too tight across the shoulders, a constant reminder that I was not the delicate doll she envisioned. Across the polished mahogany table, which reflected the chandelier like a dark, distorted mirror, Leo Thompson's eyes roamed over me. It wasn't a look of admiration. It was the cold, calculating gaze of a rancher assessing prize livestock, a gaze that made my skin crawl and my stomach clench. He was 33, with the premature softness of a man who'd never known a hard day's work, and he radiated the smug confidence that only inherited wealth can buy. "The pot roast is simply divine, Caroline," Leo drawled, his voice slick with a false charm that didn't quite reach his eyes. My mother, Caroline, beamed as if she'd just won an Oscar. "Oh, it's nothing, Leo. Amelia is quite the little homemaker herself. She has a wonderful sense for these things. Aren't you, darling?" I felt a sharp, familiar kick under the table, a stiletto heel digging into my shin. It was her silent, urgent command. Sit up straighter, smile, perform. I forced a tight-lipped smile that felt like it would crack my face, my fork clinking nervously against the china. My father, Henry, offered a strained laugh. He was a master of them. He praised Leo's latest real estate venture, his words carefully chosen, the way a man speaks to his boss, not his prospective son-in-law. The entire dinner was a meticulously staged play, and I was the sacrificial lamb. I felt like I was drowning, a doll on display, waiting to be sold. Then the moment I had been dreading arrived. Leo pushed his chair back with a deliberate scrape, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He rounded the table and knelt before me on one knee. It wasn't a gesture of heartfelt romance. It was an act of conquest, the triumphant pose of a hunter. He opened a velvet box. The diamond inside was grotesquely large, flashing a cold, lifeless fire. I didn't hear his words, just a meaningless drone. My ears were filled with the echo of my mother's voice from the night before, a conversation I'd overheard from the top of the stairs. "This deal will secure our future, Henry. It's a very generous arrangement." Deal, arrangement. The words ricocheted in my skull. A bitter taste, like bile, rose in my throat. I glanced at my father, my heart screaming, pleading for a sign. All I got was a slight shake of his head, a silent, cowardly plea in his eyes that begged, "Don't make this difficult, Amelia." The last wave of hope receded, leaving me stranded. I mumbled something about needing air and fled to the back porch. The humid air was a small relief. A minute later, the screen door creaked open. It was Leo. "Look, let's not pretend," he said, his voice stripped of its charm. "This is a setup, a good one. You'll have a comfortable life. You won't ever have to work." "What about my dreams?" I whispered, the words barely audible. "What about college?" He chuckled, a low, condescending sound that made my blood run cold. "I am your future, Amelia." And in that moment, something inside me snapped. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it felt like a cannon blast. "No." When I walked back into the dining room, the Thompsons were gone. The front door slammed shut, sealing my fate. The room felt like a vacuum. My mother approached, her face a mask of cold fury. "What did you do?" she hissed. "I saved myself," I whispered. The slap was so hard it sent stars bursting behind my eyes. "Saved yourself?" she shrieked. "You just destroyed this family. You selfish, ungrateful child." I found the letter from the University of Chicago. "Who do you think you are to have dreams? Are your dreams to humiliate me? To trample on your father's career?" "Get out of my house!" she screamed, veins bulging on her neck. I stumbled upstairs in a daze, my cheek burning. I threw a few essentials into a backpack, a toothbrush, a change of clothes, and the crumpled, precious acceptance letter that had cost me everything. When I came back down, my father was standing by the door. He wouldn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on his expensive Italian shoes. He thrust a wad of crumpled bills into my hand. $300. It wasn't a lifeline, it was a payoff. He opened the door. The first drops of the Arizona monsoon, fat and cold, splattered against my face. The door clicked shut behind me. The sound was final, an epitaph for the life I once knew. I was 18 years old, standing alone in the rain, with a broken heart and $300 to my name. My fingers, numb from the cold and the shock, fumbled for my phone. There was only one person I could call, one name, Brooke. She answered on the second ring, her sleepy voice turning sharp with alarm as I sobbed my fractured story. 20 minutes later, her beat-up Honda Civic pulled up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the relentless rain. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on her lumpy sofa, wrapped in a scratchy Afghan that smelled like her family's dog, and listened to the distant rumble of thunder. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one raging inside me. The shock from my mother's slap had subsided, leaving behind a deep, aching cold. It was in that cold that the ghosts of the past began to whisper, showing me that the final, brutal act of that evening wasn't an aberration. It was a destination we had been heading towards for years. My mind drifted back to my bedroom. My mother had insisted on painting it a pale, dusty pink. It wasn't the happy pink of childhood, but the oppressive, institutional pink of a gilded cage. Every item was her choice. The lace-trimmed curtains, the floral bedspread, the vanity table where I was supposed to practice looking pretty. My real treasures, my books on business and biographies of strong women, were hidden under my bed like contraband. I vividly remembered the day she found my copy of Katharine Graham's life story. She'd held it between two fingers as if it were contaminated. "This will fill your head with nonsense, Amelia," she'd said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "A woman's legacy is her family, not a byline. Read the magazines I left for you." She dropped it into the wastebasket with a soft thud that echoed the closing of a door. And then there were the grades. My achievements were never my own. They were merely data points to be compared and found wanting. I remembered the thrill of getting a 98 on my AP history exam. I had practically flown home, the paper clutched in my hand, a rare burst of pride swelling in my chest. I presented it to my mother. She glanced at it, her expression unchanged. 98, she mused, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the paper. And who got the 100? Was it one of the Henderson boys? You see, Amelia, men don't appreciate a woman who is almost the best. They want the best, or they want a woman who knows her place. You're somewhere in the middle. It's awkward. The joy inside me curdled, my 98 becoming a badge of my own inadequacy. But the deepest cuts, the ones that festered in the dark, came from my father's silence. When I was 16, I won the state debate championship. I came home clutching a golden trophy that felt as heavy and real as the sun. I found my father in his study. For a fleeting, beautiful moment, I saw it in his eyes, pure, undiluted pride. He was about to speak, to congratulate me, when my mother appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. Arguing for a living, she'd stated coldly. What an unattractive skill for a future wife. The light in my father's eyes extinguished as if she'd flipped a switch. He cleared his throat, turned away from me, and looked at his desk. Your mother has a point, he'd mumbled. Perhaps focus on more delicate pursuits. That betrayal, the surrender of his pride to her judgment, hurt more than 1,000 of my mother's slaps. I curled up tighter on the sofa, the scratchy wool pressing into my still burning cheek. The final memory surfaced, the one with the paper napkins. I was always scribbling ideas, business plans, and marketing slogans on whatever was available. One afternoon, my mother, on one of her tidying sprees, found a stack of them on my desk. They were filled with diagrams for a community building app I'd been dreaming up. She held them up with disdain. A woman's legacy isn't written on scraps of paper, Amelia, she'd said, her tone dripping with a pity that felt worse than anger. It's a good marriage, well-behaved children, a respected home. Stop these fantasies. And she had swept them all into the trash can right in front of me. Lying there in the dark, listening to Brooke's gentle snores from the next room, I realized the truth. They hadn't just thrown me out, they had been throwing away pieces of me for years. They thought they had finally discarded the last, most troublesome piece. They thought I was a failed product, a faulty asset being returned. But they didn't know that when you have nothing left to lose, you have everything to gain. A cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. What was I going to do now? The question, what was I going to do now, was answered not with a grand plan, but with the brutal, monotonous reality of survival. The first few weeks after being thrown out were a blur of crashing on Brooke's sofa and desperately searching for work. I enrolled in classes at Mesa Community College, a far cry from the ivy-covered walls of Chicago I had dreamed of. My new life was measured in 8-hour shifts and the constant dull ache of exhaustion in my bones. My world became a cycle of 3 jobs. Mornings began before sunrise at the Daily Grind, a small coffee shop where the air was perpetually thick, with the smell of burnt espresso and the jarring roar of the bean grinder. My hands were always raw and red, scalded by steam and chapped by harsh cleaning chemicals. By afternoon, I was at the local Safeway, my uniform a cheap polyester vest that always smelled faintly of stale bread. I pushed heavy carts, stocked endless shelves of canned goods, and faced the impatient glares of customers, my own humiliation a silent companion. Evenings were for babysitting, where I'd clean up scattered toys in sprawling suburban homes. a painful echo of the orderly, childless world I had come from. Dinner was usually a squashed sandwich eaten on the city bus, or leftover pastries from the coffee shop that tasted like sugar and defeat. I grew thin, and the dark circles under my eyes became permanent fixtures. My first apartment was a tiny studio in a rundown complex in Tempe, the kind of place where the rent was cheap for a reason. A musty smell hit me every time I opened the door. The floral-patterned wallpaper, a relic from the 70s, was peeling away from the drywall in yellowed strips. At night, I would lie in the dark and hear the faint, sickening scuttle of cockroaches in the walls. It was a universe away from my pink bedroom in Scottsdale, with its weekly cleaning service and plush carpets. One night, trying to tape a peeling corner of wallpaper back to the wall, I slid to the floor and finally broke down. The tears weren't for the cockroaches or the peeling paint. They were for the crushing, absolute loneliness, for the terrifying realization that if I vanished from this earth, not a single person in my family would even know, or perhaps even care. 3 months into this new life, the thin envelope I had been waiting for arrived. It was from the University of Chicago's financial aid office. My hands trembled as I tore it open. The words leaped out at me. "We regret to inform you." My heart plummeted. The scholarship was denied. The last thread connecting me to my dream had just been severed. That night, I sat on the cold linoleum floor, staring at my phone. The numbers for my parents' house burned into my memory. The thought was a siren's call, seductive and deadly. I could call, I could apologize, beg, grovel. I could endure Leo, endure the control, just to escape this bleak existence. Just as my thumb hovered over the call button, Brooke came in. She took one look at my face, at the letter on the floor, and understood everything. She knelt beside me and gently took the phone from my hand. "Don't, Amelia," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Don't you dare sell your soul for a little bit of comfort. It's not worth it." The financial reality was a constant, grinding shock. I remembered watching my mother, without a second thought, spend hundreds of dollars on a single lunch at the country club. Now I stood in the grocery aisle at Safeway, agonizing over whether to splurge on a package of chicken breasts or to resign myself to another week of pasta with canned sauce. My only pair of sneakers, worn from walking to and from the bus stop, had a hole in the sole. I walked into a Payless shoe store and stared at the rows of $20 shoes. A hot wave of shame washing over me. I thought of the designer shoes my mother had insisted I wear, and it felt like my dignity was being eroded, $1 at a time. It was at my lowest point, at the very edge of my endurance, that the universe decided to intervene. I was at the end of a grueling 10-hour shift at the daily grind, my hands shaking with exhaustion. A woman in an elegant business suit ordered an iced latte. As I turned to hand it to her, my trembling fingers lost their grip. The cup tumbled, splashing the cold, milky coffee all over her expensive-looking silk blouse. Mortified, I stammered, "Oh my God, I am so sorry." I braced myself for the yelling, the demands to speak to a manager, the public humiliation. But it never came. The woman just looked at me, her gaze sharp but not unkind. She took in my worn-out shoes, the dark circles under my eyes, the tremor in my hands. Then she offered a small, tired smile. "It's all right," she said, dabbing at her blouse with a napkin. "Don't worry about it. Honestly, you look like you're having a worse day than I am." Her name was Charlotte Green, and that simple act of grace, that unexpected moment of human connection, was the first rung on the ladder out of the pit I was in. Charlotte Green became a regular at the daily grind. She'd come in every morning at 8:15 sharp, order a black coffee, and never once mentioned the iced latte I had spilled on her. Instead, she started asking me questions. Not intrusive questions, but curious ones. About my classes at the community college, about the books I was reading, about what I wanted to do. It was the first time in my life an adult had asked about my dreams with genuine interest rather than veiled judgment. One afternoon, during my short break, she saw me scribbling on a napkin. It was an idea for a social media campaign, a silly little concept for a local bookstore. I expected her to smile politely, to dismiss it as a cute hobby. My mother's voice echoed in my head, "Stop these fantasies." But Charlotte didn't smile. She picked up the napkin, her expression serious as she studied my crude diagram. She looked at it for a long moment, then looked at me. "You have an eye for this," she said, her voice matter of fact. "A real instinct for communication." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. An accomplished woman, a stranger, had looked at my scraps of paper and seen potential, not foolishness. That simple sentence, spoken over the hiss of the espresso machine, was more valuable to me than any A+ I had ever earned. It was a lifeline. A few weeks later, Charlotte made me an offer. "I have an entry-level position at my firm," she said, stirring her coffee. "It's a junior assistant role. The pay isn't great, and the work is mostly grunt work, making coffee, photocopying, scheduling meetings. But it's a foot in the door, a real one. Do you want it?" I stared at her, stunned into silence. It wasn't just a job, it was an escape route. It was a path forward, a future. Tears welled in my eyes, and I could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The day I started, I wore a crisp white blouse I'd found at a thrift store. It felt like armor. As I walked into the sleek professional office of Green Communications, I felt like I was stepping into a new life. The first few months were exactly as Charlotte had described. I made coffee, I sorted mail, I answered phones, but I did it all perfectly. I learned the names of every client, memorized the preferences of every team member, and I listened in every meeting, absorbing everything like a sponge. Then came the day of the Henderson account. They were a notoriously difficult client, and the team was completely stuck. Every idea had been shot down. The conference room was thick with a tense, frustrated silence. I, the invisible assistant, was just supposed to be taking notes. But an idea had been nagging at me. Timidly, I raised my hand. "What if," I started, my voice barely a whisper. We approached it from the founder's personal story. Instead of selling the product, we sell his passion. Every head in the room turned to look at me. I expected to be shut down, to be reminded of my place. But Charlotte just smiled, a small, encouraging smile. "Go on, Amelia," she said. My idea worked. It saved the project. The next morning, an email from Charlotte went out to the entire company, publicly praising my insightful contribution. I read it 3 times, my heart pounding with a pride that was entirely my own. Charlotte became my mentor. She taught me how to write a media plan, how to pitch a client, how to negotiate a contract. But more than that, she taught me to believe in my own voice. There was no control, no judgment, only guidance. When I was offered my first promotion to junior account coordinator after 18 months, I hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm ready," I confessed to her. She looked at me, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Well, I am," she said. "Amelia, don't you ever let the voices of people who wanted to keep you small Become the voice inside your head. You've earned this. You are ready. It was the validation, the unconditional support that a daughter is supposed to get from her mother. I was getting it from a woman who had started out as a stranger I'd spilled coffee on. That night, after I received my first real paycheck, I walked back to my dingy studio apartment. I was able to buy groceries without anxiety, to pay my rent without fear. I stood in the middle of the room, looking at the same peeling wallpaper, the same stained carpet. But for the first time, I didn't feel despair. I didn't feel shame. I felt a flicker, then a steady, growing flame of hope. This place was not my destination. It was just a stop along the way. For 3 years, the silence from Scottsdale was absolute. It was a void I learned to live with, a hollow space I filled with work, with late-night study sessions, with the quiet pride of building a life from scratch. I had just completed my associate's degree, and Charlotte had promoted me to junior account coordinator. I had moved into a slightly better apartment, one where I didn't have to share my space with cockroaches. For the first time, I felt a fragile sense of stability, of peace. And then, one Tuesday evening, the ghost of my past decided to call. An unknown number with a Scottsdale area code flashed on my screen. My heart gave a painful lurch. For a wild, foolish second, a flicker of hope ignited inside me. Maybe they miss me. Maybe they want to apologize. It was a hope I hadn't even known I was still carrying. After a moment of hesitation, my hand trembling slightly, I answered, "Amelia, darling, it's Mom." Her voice was a confection of sweetness, as if the last 3 years of my life, the 3 jobs, the hunger, the loneliness, had simply never happened. "I was just talking to Mrs. Henderson, and she mentioned she'd heard you were doing so well. We're so proud." I was struck silent, not by the pride, which I knew was a lie, but by the sheer breathtaking audacity of it all. No apology, no "how have you been?" No acknowledgement of the rainy night she had cast me out. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, designed to pretend that the chasm between us didn't exist. The coldness of it chilled me to the bone. She didn't wait for me to respond. "Listen, honey, the reason I'm calling is your Aunt Susan. You know she's trying to get her little flower shop off the ground. She's just so lost with all this internet advertising stuff. And I thought, well, Amelia is in that business. I'm sure she'd be happy to help out her aunt, just give her a few pointers. After all, we're family." There it was, the hook baited with the poisonous worm of familial obligation. I could see the entire trap laid out before me. This wasn't a call for reconciliation. It was a request for free labor. Helping out meant working for free. And "we're family" was the key she always used to unlock my guilt. The old familiar feeling of being seen, not as a person, but as a tool, a resource to be exploited, washed over me. It was as sickeningly familiar as the scent of her perfume. I took a steadying breath, picturing Charlotte's encouraging face. "Mom, I'm glad to hear Aunt Susan is starting a business, but I'm incredibly busy at work. My company has policies about taking on outside projects." The sweetness in her voice vanished, replaced by a wounded sigh. "Oh, I see," she said, her tone dripping with manufactured hurt. "I should have known. You get a little success, and you forget all about the people who raised you. Here, talk to your father." Before I could protest, his voice came on the line, frail and laced with practiced weariness. "Amelia, your mother's just worried about her sister. Things haven't been the same since you left. It would mean so much to her if you just helped a little. Don't make her sad." And that was the master stroke, the pincer movement. her overt aggression, his passive-aggressive guilt-tripping. His silence had once been a weapon of abandonment. Now his words were a weapon of manipulation. He was using his own weakness as a cudgel, trying to force me back into the role of the sacrificial daughter, the one who must set herself on fire to keep everyone else warm. It was more insidious, more cruel than her open hostility. But I was not the same 18-year-old girl who had cried in the rain. I had spent 3 years forging myself in the fire of independence. I thought of my thrift store work blouses, the taste of cheap coffee, the exhaustion that had been my constant companion. I had paid for my expertise with my own sweat and tears. "Dad," I said, my voice calm and even, a cold, hard stone in my chest. "I built my life from nothing. My time and my professional skills are things I have worked for. They are not free, not even for family. If Aunt Susan needs professional marketing services, I would be happy to have my company's business development team send her a quote. That is the best I can do." A dead silence hung on the line. I could picture him, his face falling, at a loss for how to respond to this new, unfamiliar version of his daughter. Then I heard a muffled sound, and my mother's voice, no longer trying to feign sweetness, shrieked through the receiver. "You ungrateful brat!" The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my hand steady. This time there were no tears, just a cold, clarifying certainty. That call wasn't a bridge back home, it was a warning. It showed me that distance wasn't enough. I needed armor, I needed a fortress. And I decided, in that moment, that I would build one so high and so strong that their toxic reach could never touch me again. That phone call from my mother became the fuel. Her angry parting words, "You ungrateful brat," did not break me. They forged me. I decided then that the fortress I needed wasn't just made of emotional distance. It had to be built with tangible achievements, with credentials so solid they could never be dismissed or belittled. I threw myself into my work and my education with the intensity of a soldier preparing for war. My life became a relentless schedule. I worked a full 40-hour week at Green Communications, soaking up every piece of knowledge Charlotte offered. As soon as my shift ended, I would race to the Arizona State University campus for my night classes. My diet consisted of lukewarm coffee and protein bars eaten in my car between the office and the lecture hall. I turned down every invitation for drinks, for dinners, for a semblance of a normal social life. My singular focus was my bachelor's degree in business administration. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a shield, it was a weapon. I remembered my mother's sneering words. "This marriage is your education." No, I would forge my own education, one that no one could ever take away from me. Some nights I'd study until my vision blurred, collapsing into bed with exhaustion. But every morning I woke up with a sharp, clear purpose. The years blurred into a montage of hard work and quiet determination. Finally, graduation day arrived, burning bright under the relentless Arizona sun. I stood in a sea of black gowns and mortarboards, the fabric of my own robe feeling heavy and significant on my shoulders. I felt a surge of pride, so fierce it almost brought me to my knees. I had done it. I scanned the crowd, a vast ocean of smiling, tearful faces. I saw other graduates being swallowed in hugs, receiving bouquets of flowers, their families capturing the moment with flashing cameras. For a single, painful moment, a familiar ache bloomed in my chest. I allowed myself to wonder what it would be like to see my parents in that crowd. Not to seek their approval, but just for them to bear witness to what their daughter had accomplished without them. But then I saw them, my real family. Charlotte and Brooke were standing on their chairs, waving frantically, their faces beaming with a pride that was pure and unconditional. They shouted my name when it was called, their voices cutting through the polite applause. A genuine smile spread across my face as I waved back, a wave of gratitude washing over me, cleansing the last remnants of sorrow. They didn't choose to be here, I thought, looking at the empty space where my parents should have been, and I no longer chose them. 2 weeks later, Charlotte called me into her office. A bottle of champagne and 2 glasses sat on her desk. "Congratulations, Amelia," she said, popping the cork with a festive sound. "You have officially outgrown us." I was stunned. "What do you mean?" She laughed, a warm, rich sound that filled the room. "I mean you don't belong here anymore, not as an employee. You have the vision, the skills, and the grit. It's time for you to build something of your own. I saw it the day you sketched an ad campaign on a napkin, and I see it even more clearly now." Her words were both terrifying and exhilarating. It was absolute, terrifying trust, the kind I had never known. Then she pushed a check across the desk. I looked down. The number written on it was $50,000. "This isn't a gift," she said, her expression serious now. "It's a seed investment in exchange for 15% of your future company. Davis Media Group. How does that sound?" I stared at the check, at the clean, confident handwriting, then up at Charlotte, my eyes blurring with tears. This wasn't just money. This was faith. This was a legacy being handed to me, ignited by a woman who was once a stranger. I thought of the crumpled $300 my father had pressed into my hand in the rain, a payoff to make me disappear. The contrast was so stark, it reshaped my entire world. This was not a dismissal. This was an invitation. My quiet vow of survival had now become a promise of an empire. "I'm in," I said, my voice steady and sure. With Charlotte's $50,000 check safely deposited, the real work began. The first headquarters of Davis Media Group was the corner of my small living room. My desk was a scuffed wooden table I'd bought for $10 at Goodwill, and my office chair was a dining chair that wobbled. I printed a simple sign on my inkjet printer, Davis Media Group, and taped it to the wall above my laptop. It was my entire world. The first 6 months were brutal. I was the CEO, the accountant, the salesperson, the creative director, and the janitor. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by cheap coffee and a terrifying, relentless drive. I built a simple website and started cold calling local businesses. The rejections were constant and soul-crushing. I heard it all. "You're too young. We're looking for a more established firm. What's your track record?" Each no felt like a confirmation of my mother's worst predictions. There were nights I'd just sit there amid stacks of invoices and rejected proposals, the fear of failure a physical weight on my chest. I wasn't just afraid of losing Charlotte's money. I was terrified of proving my mother right. But every morning I'd look at that flimsy, taped-up sign, and the fire in my belly would roar back to life. I wasn't fighting for money or for prestige. I was fighting for my own soul. My breakthrough came from the most unlikely of places. It was a small, struggling bakery in a strip mall, ironically named Sweet Caroline's. The owner, Mrs. Garcia, was a warm, elderly woman who had poured her life savings into the shop, but knew nothing about marketing. She couldn't afford my standard rates, but she had something more valuable, a story. Listening to her, I felt a powerful connection. I didn't just create an ad campaign. I told her story with all the heart I could muster. I created a series of short, authentic videos for social media, capturing her journey from a small kitchen in her home country to the pride she felt every time she pulled a fresh tray of pastries from the oven. The campaign went viral in our local community. People didn't just come for the pastries, they came to meet Mrs. Garcia. Sweet Carolines became a local sensation. And more importantly, the name Davis Media Group started to spread. The phone began to ring. Small businesses, nonprofits, other startups, they all wanted the same authentic storytelling I had given the little bakery. I hired my first employee, a bright-eyed recent graduate named Sarah who was as hungry as I was. By the end of our second year, we moved out of my living room and into a real office, a small but professional space with a proper sign and 8 dedicated employees. It was during a pitch to a prospective client that I met Jacob Stone. He was the owner of a rapidly growing chain of home goods stores, a man with a quiet confidence that was the complete opposite of Leo Thompson's arrogance. During my presentation, he didn't stare at me or interrupt. He listened intently, his focus absolute. He asked intelligent, insightful questions that showed he wasn't just hearing my words, he was engaging with my ideas. After the meeting, which we won, he didn't ask me to dinner. He asked if I'd grab a coffee to talk more about Q3 strategy. Our relationship began there, built on a foundation of mutual professional respect. He admired my drive and my mind. I admired his integrity and his vision. We became business allies long before we ever thought about becoming something more. The shift was so gradual, so natural, I barely noticed it happening. Our coffee meetings about strategy slowly bled into conversations about our lives, our dreams, our pasts. He never tried to fix me or save me from my history. He was simply the best listener I had ever known. He became my biggest cheerleader. When I worked late, he'd show up at the office with a container of soup. When we landed a huge account, he was the first person I called, and his genuine excitement mirrored my own. He respected my career, not as a hobby or a distraction, but as an essential part of who I was. One night, after we had been seeing each other for a few months, I gathered the courage to tell him about Leo Thompson and the night I was thrown out. I told the story in a flat, detached voice, expecting him to be shocked, or worse, to pity me. He just listened. When I was finished, he reached across the table and took my hand. His thumb gently stroked my knuckles. "That guy," he said, his voice low and steady, "is an idiot, a complete and utter fool for not seeing the most valuable thing in the entire world when it was sitting right in front of him." And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly safe with a man. This wasn't a deal. This wasn't a transaction. It was a partnership. Life was finally impossibly good. The business was thriving. I was in a healthy, loving relationship, and I was the sole architect of my own life. It was a peace I had fought for, a happiness I had built brick by brick. And then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, I stood in my bathroom, staring at 2 pink lines on a plastic stick, and realized my entire world was about to change all over again. The 2 pink lines on that plastic stick sent a wave of sheer panic through me, a cold dread that had nothing to do with my career or the timing. It was a deeper, more primal fear. I wasn't afraid of being a mother. I was terrified of being my mother. The thought was a chilling whisper in the back of my mind. What if the poison was in my blood? What if, despite everything, I became controlling, judgmental, a purveyor of conditional love? What if I looked at my own child one day and saw only an asset, a reflection of my own ambitions? That evening, I confessed this paralyzing fear to Jacob. We were sitting on our small balcony, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. I told him everything, my voice trembling as I laid bare the ugliest of my anxieties. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his presence a warm, solid anchor in my sea of panic. When I finished, he pulled me into his arms, holding me tight. "Amelia, look at me," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You are not your mother. You are the strongest, kindest, most resilient woman I have ever known. The very fact that you're afraid of this proves you will never become her. We will do this together, and I promise you, our child will never, for 1 second of their life, doubt that they are loved unconditionally for exactly who they are." His words were more than just reassurance, they were an absolution. They gave me the strength to breathe again, to push back the shadows and embrace the terrifying, wonderful journey ahead. 9 months later, Olivia was born. The moment they placed her in my arms, a tiny, squirming bundle of life, the world shifted on its axis. I looked down at her perfect miniature face, at her dark eyes blinking up at me, and a love so fierce, so overwhelming washed over me, cleansing every last trace of my old fears. This tiny person was not an extension of me. She was her own universe. As she slept against my chest in the quiet hospital room, I made a silent vow, a promise that would become the guiding principle of my life. It wasn't a promise for an easy life, but a promise of freedom. "I promise you," I whispered, my lips against her soft hair, "that your voice will always be heard in our home. Your dreams will be celebrated, no matter how big or small. You will never be a transaction. You will never be an asset. You are and will always be, simply and magnificently, your own person." That vow was a conscious act of repair, a way to reparent the wounded child still living inside of me. Every time Olivia, as a toddler, insisted on wearing mismatched socks or passionately argued that blue was a better color than pink, I would smile, my heart full, and encourage her beautiful, budding spirit. I was breaking the cycle. Our life together was a partnership in every sense. Jacob and I shared the late-night feedings, the diaper changes, the endless joys and challenges of raising a child. When Olivia was 2, he proposed. There was no grand staged gesture, no ostentatious diamond meant to impress an audience. It happened on a sunny Sunday morning on a beach in California. We were building a sandcastle with Olivia, our hands covered in wet sand, her delighted shrieks filling the air. Jacob simply turned to me, his eyes full of a love so clear and steady, it took my breath away. He pulled a small, simple platinum band from his pocket. "I want to spend the rest of my life building things with you, Amelia," he said. "Everything from sandcastles to a family." We were married a month later, a small ceremony with only Charlotte, Brooke, and a handful of our closest friends as witnesses. We said our vows with our toes in the sand, with Olivia giggling in Jacob's arms. It was a beginning, not a transaction. A partnership built on respect, laughter, and a deep, abiding love. Meanwhile, Davis Media Group was exploding. With Jacob as my silent partner and biggest supporter, I took risks, I innovated, and we grew beyond my wildest dreams. By the time Olivia turned 5, we had offices in 3 cities and over 70 employees. My company was named one of the fastest-growing women-led businesses in the country. One day, my CFO came into my office with a proposal. He spread a series of charts on my desk. "Given your travel schedule," he said, "it no longer makes financial sense to charter planes. The numbers are clear. The company should buy its own." I laughed out loud. It sounded like the most absurd, extravagant idea in the world. But as I looked at the numbers, at the relentless logic of it, I realized he was right. The day I first stepped onto the sleek jet, the Davis Media Group logo emblazoned on its tail, I didn't feel a surge of arrogance or pride in the wealth it represented. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of gratitude. I sank into a plush leather seat and looked out the window as the ground fell away. My mind flashed back to a girl of 18, standing alone in the rain, clutching 300 crumpled dollars as if it were her only lifeline. This plane, it wasn't a symbol of wealth. It was a symbol of freedom. It was the physical manifestation of a promise I had made to myself that night. I would never be powerless again. I was at 30,000 feet in every sense of the word. My life was perfect. My business was a success. My family was a haven of love and support. And it was there, in that moment of absolute peace and triumph, that the past reached out and tapped me on the shoulder. My phone buzzed with a call from a distant cousin. Her voice was somber. "Amelia," she said, "I thought you should know. Your father. He had a heart attack this morning. It was bad. He's out of emergency surgery, but it was close." The news didn't bring satisfaction. It didn't bring anger. It brought a sudden, hollow ache. A realization that for all my success, for all the distance I had put between myself and my past, there was still an unresolved chord, a wound that had never truly been allowed to heal. The news of my father's heart attack didn't fill me with sorrow. It filled me with a strange, unsettling clarity. For 11 years I had built walls. I had built an empire. But I had built it all on top of a foundational crack, a wound I had covered over but never truly healed. For my own peace, and for Olivia to have a complete story of who she was, I had to go back. I had to face them. "Will you come with me?" I asked Jacob that night. He didn't hesitate, just tightened his grip on my hand. "To the ends of the earth," he said. The decision was made. The next Davis Media Group office would be in Scottsdale, Arizona. It was a smart business move, but it was more than that. It was a declaration of victory. I wasn't returning as the banished daughter. I was returning as the queen to her former kingdom. And I would not be announcing my arrival. I wanted to see their real reactions, stripped bare of any time to prepare, to put on their masks. We flew in on a Thursday. I rented a sleek black Range Rover, a vehicle that felt like modern armor. Driving through the familiar, sun-drenched streets, everything looked the same, yet smaller, sadder. I pulled up to the house I grew up in. The lawn was neatly trimmed, but the paint was peeling slightly at the edges of the windows. Holding Olivia's small hand in mine, I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The silence stretched on for a long moment before the door creaked open. It was my father. The man who stood there was a ghost of the father I remembered. He was thinner, frailer, the confident posture gone, replaced by a weary slump. But the shock in his eyes was electric. His jaw went slack, his face paling. He stared at me as if I were an apparition. Then his gaze dropped to the small girl clutching my hand, and his confusion deepened. My mother appeared behind him, her face already set in a frown of irritation at the unexpected visitor. When she saw me, she froze mid-step, her hand flying to her throat. The air in the doorway grew thick, heavy with 11 years of unspoken words. "Hello, Father. Hello, Mother," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a frozen lake. "This is Olivia, your granddaughter." The house inside was stagnant, trapped in time. The same furniture, the same paintings on the wall, but everything was coated in a thin layer of dust, a sign of a life without hired help. It was in that stifling quiet that my father did something that completely unraveled me. After a long, awkward silence, he shuffled away, murmuring, "Wait here." He returned from upstairs a moment later, clutching a thick, leather-bound scrapbook. He placed it on the coffee table. With trembling fingers, he opened it. Inside, meticulously cut out and pasted, were dozens of articles, news clippings, and printed out photos from the internet. Every award Davis Media Group had won, every feature written about me, every public milestone of the life I had built. I followed your career," he stammered, his voice thick. My mother, still rigid by the door, added quietly, "Your room, it's just as you left it." A horrifying realization dawned on me. They hadn't forgotten me. They had enshrined me. I wasn't a daughter they had lost. I was a secret they had kept. This scrapbook, that room, it wasn't a shrine of love. It was a museum of their own regret, a constant private reminder of what they had thrown away. The thought was more chilling than if they had erased me completely. "Why?" I asked, my voice sharp, cutting through the silence. "Why didn't you ever call?" My mother looked away. My father was the one who answered, his eyes on the floor. We thought you wouldn't want to hear from us. And your mother, she wasn't well, for a long time after you left." Then Caroline spoke, her voice brittle. "We were wrong about Leo." She said it not as an apology, but as a statement of fact. "He was arrested a few years ago. Domestic violence. His new wife. It was all over the papers." She looked at me then, a flicker of something, fear, shame, in her eyes. "We realized then what we almost pushed you into. It wasn't a confession of love. It was a confession of their fear of social disgrace." The realization that they had almost tied their family name to a violent criminal was what had shaken them, not the thought of my potential suffering. The last of my childish illusions shattered into dust. My eyes swept over the room again, taking in their faded clothes, the worn-out armchair. They were struggling, and in their struggle, I saw not an opportunity for pity, but an opportunity to finally, definitively, end the game. I looked directly at my father. "I'm opening an office here in Scottsdale," I said, my tone cool and professional. "I'm in need of a reliable financial manager. I'm offering you the position." I let the offer hang in the air between us, a lifeline and a judgment all at once. The 300 crumpled dollars he had given me in the rain flashed in my mind. Now I was the one offering a future. The power had shifted. Now it was their turn to answer. My father accepted the job offer, not with pride, but with a humbled, stunned gratitude that was entirely new to him. A week later, I invited them to dinner, not at their house, not at mine, but on neutral ground. A high-end restaurant in downtown Scottsdale. The kind of place they'd always talked about, but I'd never been allowed to enter. The power dynamic had shifted the moment I chose the venue. It was there, over appetizers and sparkling water, that I laid out the new terms of our engagement. "I want to be clear about how this is going to work," I began, my voice calm and firm as I folded my napkin in my lap. They both looked at me, for the first time in my life, as if I were the one in charge. First, regarding Olivia, her choices are her own, from what she wears to what she dreams of becoming. There will be no judgment, no backhanded compliments, no manipulation, only support. I looked directly at my mother, holding her gaze until she blinked and looked down at her plate. Second, my marriage. Jacob and I are equal partners. He is not my keeper, he is my ally. We make decisions together. I turned to my father. And third, this job is not charity, it is an opportunity. I expect you to perform. You will report to my CFO, not to me, and you will earn your salary just like any other employee. It was a declaration of independence, a new constitution for a broken family. It was not delivered with anger, but with the cool clarity of a CEO setting expectations. For the first time in my memory, they simply listened, their silence a mixture of shock and reluctant acceptance. A few weeks after my father started his new role, he asked to see me in my office after hours. He closed the door behind him and stood there for a moment, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, lost amidst the modern furniture and glass walls of the world I had built. "I'm sorry, Amelia," he finally said, his voice cracking, the words sounding rusty from disuse. "I was a coward. I know that now. I was so afraid of my own failures, so afraid of your mother's disappointment, that I let her sacrifice you. It was easier than being a man, than being a father." He looked up, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "Every article I cut out about your success. It was a source of pride, but it was also a knife in my heart. A constant reminder of the man I failed to be for you. It was the apology I had waited 11 years to hear, the raw, unvarnished truth. It didn't magically erase the pain, but it filled a hollow space I hadn't known was still there, an aching void of a father's protection. I didn't say, 'I forgive you.' It was too soon, too simple for such a complex wound. Instead, I gave him the truth. 'Thank you for telling me that, Dad.' The path forward was not easy. My mother's emotional armor was thick, forged over a lifetime of insecurity. So I made another executive decision. "I think we should try family therapy," I suggested during another stilted dinner. Predictably, Caroline balked. Airing our dirty laundry to a stranger? Absolutely not. But then the second miracle happened. My father, the man who had always retreated into silence, found his voice. "We're going, Caroline," he said, his tone quiet but unyielding. "If we want any chance of keeping our daughter in our lives, we're going." The sessions were difficult. They were battlefields of long, painful silences and late, reluctant tears. There were times I wanted to quit, times the old anger flared up so hot I could barely speak. But slowly, painstakingly, the walls of ice began to thaw. They were learning to listen without formulating a defense. I was learning to build boundaries without building walls. It wasn't a miracle. It was work. Hard, necessary work. 1 year after my return, we celebrated Olivia's 6th birthday at a public park in Scottsdale. The Arizona sun was warm and gentle. My mother, Caroline, had baked a cake. It was a little lopsided, the frosting uneven, but she had made it herself, a messy, imperfect act of love that spoke louder than any perfectly crafted apology. My father, looking healthier and happier than I'd seen him in years, was pushing Olivia on the swings, his genuine laughter echoing in the warm afternoon air. I sat on a picnic blanket next to Jacob, watching them, watching this new, fragile, imperfect family we were building from the wreckage of the old. And in that moment, I finally understood the true meaning of success. It wasn't the private jet or the multiple offices. My real legacy was this moment. It was the freedom I had fought for. It was the power to break a toxic cycle and to create a better, healthier model for my own daughter. I hadn't just built a business empire. I had rebuilt a family on my own terms. My journey began on a rainy night with $300 and a shattered heart. It taught me that family isn't always about the blood you share, but about the people who see your value when you can't see it yourself. It's about the family you choose and the family you build. If you are in your own rainy night, remember that the dawn is always ahead. What will your story be? My story has found its sunrise, but perhaps yours is just beginning. My journey taught me that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about how we rise. It taught me that sometimes the family that values you is the one you build yourself. Now I want to ask you, what part of my rise resonated with you the most? Was it the moment I stood up for my dreams, the kindness I received from a stranger, or the day I returned on my own terms? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you know someone who is fighting their own silent battle, share my story with them. Let's create a community of survivors together, reminding each other that no storm, no matter how fierce, lasts forever.